Listening is easy, right? It's just I speak and you listen, and when you speak, I listen. But it is far more complicated than that. And in this video, we'll look at the listening process. Just as car mechanics have to know how a car functions to fix problems, communicators need to know how listening functions. In this video, we will cover 3 topics: the misconceptions about listening, the process, and how to build better listening skills. Get a piece of paper and something to write with, and then answer the following questions as true or false. Stop the video if you need to. Listening and hearing are the same. Listening is easy or automatic. Listening develops naturally. Anyone can listen well if they really try. The speaker is responsible for the success of communication. If you heard it, they said it. Attitude and listening are unrelated. And finally, people remember most of what they hear. So how do you think you did? It's time to score your answers. Numbers 1 through 8 are false. Surprised? Well, let's look at each question to see why. Many people think listening and hearing are the same, but they are very different. Hearing is simply sound waves reaching the inner ear, while listening is processing those sounds. It would be impossible to mentally process every sound that reaches our inner ear. People think that listening is easy or that it's automatic, but only hearing is easy and automatic. If someone slams the door, we hear it. It may even interrupt our listening, but listening itself takes a great deal of energy and effort, and we have to differentiate which sounds are more important and then interpret their meaning. People think listening develops naturally. This assumption is one of the greatest causes of miscommunication. It's why we spend 12 plus years with classes to teach people how to write, but we never really teach how to listen. When you were a baby, someone taught you to say words, and if your parents kept a baby book, it probably has the date of your first word, but no one has a baby book that says the first time they listened. Why? Because people assume it happens naturally. Listening is actually a learned process, and unfortunately, it usually happens through trial and error. Most of the time, no one notices when we listen well, but we get in trouble when we don't. And that is not an effective way to learn, but it is the training program for most of us. Anyone can listen well if they really try. Well, it's true that sometimes we don't put forth effort into listening, but other times it doesn't matter how hard we try, we cannot overcome the barriers. Try holding a conversation by a working jackhammer. And it's hard to focus if you have a raging migraine. There are various reasons that we can try hard, and not succeed. The speaker is responsible for the success of communication. While the speaker has partial responsibility for the success, the receiver shares that responsibility. If I send a check that you refuse to cash, neither of us gets the benefit. The sender can do everything right, but it means nothing if the receiver does not process the message for whatever the reason. If you heard it, they said it. This is also the basis for numerous misunderstandings. But when we know that there may be errors in what we process, we are more likely to check our interpretations. This past week, I heard someone say they will be leaving us. What they actually said was, they will be leading us. By checking what I thought I heard against what made the most sense, I was able to clarify their meaning. Think about how easy it is to confuse these two numbers, 15 and 50. But there is a huge difference between tickets that are $15 each and tickets that are $50 each. What does attitude have to do with listening? Everything. They are closely related. Not only does it affect how we process what we hear, it affects the amount of effort we put forth in processing. Attitude can help us have an open mind, or it can cause us to put up barriers. Another common misconception is that people remember most of what they hear. Think about comments from teachers when you've asked a question and they said, "I explained that yesterday, you should have been listening." That is someone that does not understand that even when we try hard, we remember only about 25% of the information we take in. Are you feeling helpless about listening? Well, there is good news, and that is that since listening does not develop naturally, we can learn to listen better. Understanding the process is the first step. Listening involves three major steps: acquiring, processing, and understanding. When a door slams, it creates a sound wave, and this wave travels to our antenna, or our outer ear. From there, it's funneled into our middle ear, where it's amplified, and then that amplified sound wave is moved to the inner ear, where it's turned into electrical energy. The brain only processes electrical information, so without this conversion, the brain would not even detect any input. Sounds pretty simple, right? Wrong. At every step, there are possible conflicts to interfere with the process. The acquiring process can be affected by noise and barriers. Noise is short-term and it allows communication to proceed, but there may be errors. Barriers stop communication from occurring. These can be things as common as antibiotics. Long-term use of antibiotics can damage hearing, but so can repeated ear infections. And as we discussed earlier, attitude can affect our acquiring process and even create barriers to the message. A disconnect, such as conflicting data, can cause confusion. This happens when what we see doesn't match what we hear. An example is someone saying yes, but shaking their head to indicate no. Another example is someone slamming doors but saying that nothing's wrong. Distracting movements can create noise or barriers. Someone who repeatedly plays with their hair, fidgets with their hands, or someone walking past a doorway can all interrupt our communication. Even an irritating voice can disrupt listening. Whiny, nasally, or high-pitched voices can create situations that make listening uncomfortable and inhibit people from putting forth effort. Part of this is the connection that voice has to attitude. I'm pretty sure you've heard people say that someone has selective hearing. Well, we all do. We have already discussed that you cannot process every sound, so we have to use selective perception to determine what's important. Selective perception is drawn in 6 different ways. Chances are that when you first saw this slide, your eyes went immediately to the bird on the right. The painted bunting is more unique than a sparrow. Intensity is another avenue that grabs perception. A brightly colored bird is more intensely colored than a brown and white bird. Attitude is another draw for selective perception. Have you noticed that when you're in a good mood, you like happy music? But it's not high on your list when you're sad or hurting. We are drawn to things about which we have some knowledge because we have frames of references to help organize the information that we receive. This is much harder to do when we know nothing about the information. And this is why you can hear someone speaking your native language in a crowd of people when you are in a foreign country. Interest is another key factor in what information draws our attention. It's what makes you stop talking when your favorite song begins playing, or makes you stop channel surfing to watch a particular show. You're not likely to slow down for something about which you have no interest. And this is why you find some classes more interesting than others. Lastly, we have need. Even if you are uninterested and have a bad attitude, but you need the information, then you are more likely to pay attention to messages than if you also had no need. Now that we've talked about how we acquire sound and attend to sound, let's look at how we become better listeners by improving our understanding. Words are just symbols or codes to represent an idea, and the bigger our vocabulary, the greater chance that we understand messages correctly. When what we think we heard does not match the context or the expectations, then we use perception checks to verify that what we think we heard is what was actually said. We ask questions. And finally, as competent communicators, we should take responsibility. We understand that communication is complicated, and something as simple as "you look nice" can be misinterpreted. We could get a response of "thank you," but we also might hear "what's wrong with the way I usually look." We shouldn't blame others. We do what we can to mitigate damage and acknowledge that even with the best skills by both parties, miscommunication can and will occur. Typically, we do blame the other person. Sometimes it really is our fault, but often no one is at fault. Communication is simply complicated and tricky. To build our skills, we need to consider the importance of the communication. Let's face it, it's not effective to pour tons of effort into something that has little importance. But we really should put forth that effort when communication is important. Sometimes we need to adjust our attitude. Attitude is a choice. And making a choice to have a good attitude when we're in a bad mood is hard, but it's possible. It takes practice. If it was easy, we would be in great moods all the time. We also need to focus on the communication at hand. People often think that they can multitask effectively, but studies show that people who believe this nearly always overrate their abilities when it's actually tested. You cannot fully concentrate on a face-to-face communication if you are also texting at the same time. Putting forth the effort needed is easier if we can identify the gains in store for us in every situation. If there are few rewards, there's little reason to exert the energy and effort. Not every situation requires our undivided attention, but many do. Part of giving someone our attention is ignoring distractions, but again, selective perception enters into this. Just because we're on autopilot with selective perception does not mean we cannot take control. Again, we get better at this when we move our selective choices to the forefront of our thinking and monitor those choices. Sometimes what we need is not what is most interesting or unique. And finally, we need to concentrate as we listen. But even concentrating too hard on one part can cause us to miss other important information. As you can see, listening is not easy or automatic. It does not develop naturally, despite the misconceptions that people have. But that is good news. If it was the case that it developed naturally, we would be stuck with the listening skills with which we are born. Now that you understand more about the listening process, you have the choice. You can grow your skills, improve your listening, and in doing so, improve your life.